Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking time to join us. My name is Edward Hillel. I'm the artistic director of the G Project, and it's my pleasure to host this ninth episode of season 2 of the G Sessions. This weekly live short conversation is part of the Generation Project, our public art campaign that encourages dialogue between people from all walks of life so that we begin to recognize that we are all immigrants of different generations, or what we call Gs. We believe that if we each see one another as equals, with privileges and with responsibilities to do right by each other, then this will have an impact on how we treat our neighbors, our communities, and our planet. Today, it is my pleasure to host Emerald Arguelles, a young photographer I discovered on Instagram. Emerald is from Savannah, Georgia, from where there you are.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. So Emerald, you are, if I can explain, an emerging Latinx image maker, speaking to the current moment and offering a critique, I think, of the white patriarchy in the current US government, while celebrating all of us, which is a tall order in itself, but at the same time, you are also editor-in-chief of the contemporary art online journal Ain't Bad.
Yes, that's correct.
And I'd say that ain't bad.
No, it's great. It's great.
So tell me, I mean, first, why did you decide to be part of our program?
So I think in my upbringing, I think first I should say my mother is Black and my dad is Cuban. So I think that growing up in New Orleans, there was like this huge mix of cultures that I really loved, and it was very much celebrated. But I think as I got older, I started to see that certain people have this way of thinking that something belongs to them, more specifically the United States, that's something that they own, when that's false. It's been like a collaborative effort of primarily Black and people of color that make this country what it is. And I think celebrating that and acknowledging that is something that I align with on a fundamental level.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And so you have where did you grow up? Tell us a little bit about.
So I was kind of a little
bit.
Where
were you born? Where you grew up?
Yeah, so I was kind of a little bit all over the place. So I was born in New Orleans, and then right around the time of Katrina, I was about 10, moved to Ohio. When I graduated high school in Ohio, I ended up joining the Marine Corps, ended up getting stationed in North Carolina. Once I completed that, moved to Georgia, and I'm here now. So I've been around.
How did you first get involved in, I guess, image making, photography? You're a kind of a heterogeneous, multidisciplinary type of artist. So how did it start?
So photography wasn't my first love by any means. One of my best friends was a photographer, and that kind of like sparked my interest, but it wasn't anything that I was passionate about. But I was a heavy concert goer, and a friend of mine was like, hey, if you shoot these concerts, you can go for free. So was my introduction into photography. But doing tour photography while being a full-time student wasn't really working for me in any way. So I transitioned into fine art. And then I think upon that, I was able to find so many conversations and concepts that had never really been introduced to me before. And then that kind of started me on a path of finding out what is one thread that I want throughout my entire work. And that thread is celebrating Black people and people of color in an accurate way that really celebrates them, that honors them, and honors the community that I came from.
And you've done it so well. It's wonderful that you found, your thing, the thread that really you care about, that you can now pursue and deepen and expand upon. It must feel so good to be at that stage and have that sense of purpose.
Yes, it does. It does. I feel like a lot of people um, are still finding theirs, and that's fine. I think that over time, more things will be added to my purpose. But as of right now, I'm pretty concrete on what my purpose is.
Well, you have produced, I saw 5 series of photographs. I would say I would describe they combine portraiture, performance, a landscape to portray Black bodies and myths. Do you want to talk a little bit about your work? Do you want to even show us something if you feel like it?
Yeah.
And tell us a little bit about whom like you wish to speak to through your photographs.
So I know one, well, just a few. I think it started as, let me portray Black people in a way that I haven't seen them before. And I think my first introduction to photography was through Robert Mapplethorpe. And I think over time, it's just kind of like, oh, I've never really seen this before. This is interesting. What if I can do this with Black people? And then it slowly started to transition into things that I believe are myths, which kind of started in more so of like a religious sense, where I didn't really see Black people in churches. I never saw angels depicted as Black people. And it's a disconnect in your identity. So one of my favorite series was My God Wears a Do-Rag. And my friends, Black men, I'm like, well, I can depict them as gods in this very like angelic way that is still modern to where we are in the time, but depicted in a way where they're godly in the way that I see them. And that was a great project to work on. And I worked on it with an all Black team. And it was beautiful. And then I had another series called Tandem that really talked about Black homosexuality amongst women in the Black community. And that was something that was kind of difficult because I couldn't find inspiration anywhere. Every time I tried to look for reference images, I couldn't find any, which kind of prompted me to kind of go inward and figure out like, what does this look like to you? And those are the ones that I worked on like very early when I first started shooting. And then more recently is a series is Isn't It Beautiful? And that's an ode to Kathleen Cleaver, which is a Black Panther. And she was describing Black women and Black hair. And she's like, isn't it beautiful? We don't have to minimize ourselves or diminish what we are. And I went to all these beauty salons and barbershops in Savannah over a course of 10 weeks and photographed what was the environment in there. And it was very much like home once again. So not to ramble, but those are the things that I feel like are very important to me. And those are the concepts that I really like to tackle in my work.
Do you have any photographs, maybe one that you can show us and talk about it?
Yeah.
Just to give us a little teaser, and then of course we could look you up online.
Of course. So I think that this image, it really contests with being my favorite. But it's this right here, which is in my photo book called Isn't It Beautiful? So this image, I actually didn't even really see it at first when I was going through and doing my edits, because this was all shot on 35 millimeter black and white film. And this image is titled Heavenly Hands. But I definitely think that even the grasp of the scissors and the comb is just absolutely beautiful and it's so angelic. But it's also this cutting of the hair that is absolutely symmetrical and perfect. It's one of my favorite images. And also another image that I think is very timeless, which has always been my goal in photography, is Black Madonna. And this little girl, when she was in the salon, she was so intrigued with my camera and she wanted to keep taking pictures and she was posing and taking pictures of everyone else. But I caught this moment of her mom getting her hair done, getting her hair washed, and her daughter's just looking up to her. And it's reminiscent of Virgin and Child. which is another thing that I never saw Black people being depicted in. So it's definitely one of my favorite images.
It's really moving, actually. Those are that first image of the cutting of the hair is something that really struck me and made me call out to you. Just this everyday gesture of, we can each remember and feel. You've taken something that is particular to one group and made it universal, and that's just so beautiful.
Thank you.
And the way you've taken the the Madonna, from a kind of a closed religious image that we only see in these hallowed places of faith and prayer, and you made it a daily image is also very beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think people will see more when they go to your site. Now, you also produce, of all the things you do, you also produce clothing, and you have this hoodie called Black Madonna, right?
Yes. So I worked with a friend of mine from my school, and he does beautiful designs. And I had a concept of something that, of course, I wanted the image on some apparel of such, but I did want it to have context. So I'm actually wearing it now. And of course, the title Black Madonna is on there. It has the traditional image of Black Madonna. And I'm gonna stand up a little bit. So then my image is here placed at the bottom. And then there's the text here that what Black Madonna was created in Savannah, Georgia. And it's the epitome of Black women and Black salons, and really just an ode to the hustle of Black women and this very much of like this ambitious nature that we all have. And it's really something that I wanted everyone to have and to share, and also to be a reminder to other people as well.
Amen. We certainly need that energy. So, okay, well, before I ask you about your own G status, I just want to remind our viewers that you also are all Gs. Somewhere down the ancestral line, we all come from somewhere. G0s, like me, were born elsewhere. G1s are born here from immigrant parents. G2s have great-grandparents are immigrants, and so on. The Lenape folks, indigenous, who populated the island of Manhattan, where I am now, are anywhere between G436 to G600. And of course, when it comes to the African American diaspora, it's a question of forced immigration, but it is an immigration nonetheless. So maybe, Emerald, tell us a little bit about your G status.
So I would identify as being G1. My mother was born in Picayune, Mississippi. And I think from the conversations that I've had with her, there's very little known knowledge of her ancestors. So as far as she knows, everybody's kind of been in Mississippi. But obviously being in the South, being in Mississippi, you come from, there is that undertone of slavery in West Africa and where you came from. But there's very little knowledge about that. But so far as with my dad, he was born in Santiago de Cuba. And my grandmother is an Afro-Cuban, and her ancestors are African and French. And to my own father's understanding and what he's relayed to me is that she's a direct descendant from the transatlantic slave trade, which is how they ended up in Cuba. And then my grandfather is a European Cuban. And there's a funny story about that, but he's a European Cuban and his ancestors come from Spain. And
tell us.
So when I was in the Marine Corps, I was deployed. And I didn't really grow up with my dad's side of the family. So there was like little knowledge of like where they come from and customs, but I kind of picked it up more when I was in Spain, when I was deployed. And I remember we were out in town and I saw this store that was actually my last name. And I'm like, oh, that's so dope, because I don't see that anywhere. So it was very much of like this very home feeling that I had, like kind of like a nostalgia feeling of being identified and being in a space. But I think like upon like doing Google researches about like where my last name comes from, it comes from the Philippines, but it's primarily based in Spain. So I think there's kind of like a little bit of everything, but I think definitely knowing where my dad comes from gives me like a great sense of self. Um, and I hope that, you know, upon like research and conversations with like the elders on my mom's side of the family, that I can get that as well.
That's those are deep roots. Have you ever been back to back? Have you ever gone to visit your, I guess, your father's homeland, Cuba, right?
I have not. He has his own emotions and feelings about Cuba itself, but he has family that is there. I hope one day I can go. I know it's a beautiful place to be, so I hope I can.
You know, there is a photography festival in Havana, which is really wonderful, and they might be interested in meeting you as well.
Yes, that would be lovely. That would
Yeah,
definitely be lovely. I would love to go.
yeah. So, you know, we do ask our guests also, if possible, to share something with us, an object or an image or anything. I don't know if you've had a chance to find anything since I asked you a couple of days ago. Oh,
So
you did. Great.
yeah, so definitely the book is one thing. And it's not only of so much of being imagery. I was able to conduct an interview with my mom, who is a cosmetologist. She's been one for about 20, oh, I don't even want to say 20 years, like 20 plus years, she's been a cosmetologist. And I think that being in these spaces was definitely reminiscent of me being in there, running around her feet, sweeping up hair. But if you don't mind, like I would love to read this interview.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
It's fairly short. So I asked her, what made you work in a beauty salon? And she replied with, I think the way that people's appearance can make their outlook on life a little more optimistic. And glamour is the oldest form of witchcraft. You can take the most physically simple person and change them into a runway model with makeup and a different hairstyle. And I also asked her, why do you think that the salon is such an important place? And she stated that the salon and barbershop has been the cornerstone of many people's lives and communities, is where we go for advice, beauty, and encouragement. The salon is really missed by people during this pandemic, and I have much respect for the hairstylist and barber. You pick us up when the world sometimes lets us down. And I think that was so nice to hear from her, because she's not a very outwardly expressive person, but I think knowing the love that she has being in those spaces, they really brought everything together and really completed this project for me.
That's beautiful. That's
Thank you.
really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I'm just also wondering, did have you in your travels and you know, in your life and your experiences, have you been exposed to immigrants from other places, from elsewhere? How have you related to the fact that we are such a diverse and multilingual country? You know, that it contains so many different people. How have you reacted to that, and how have you responded to that?
I think growing up in New Orleans was a great introduction to that. Also, when I was in New York, I saw it as well. There were so many cultures of people. I had never really been around Jewish people that often. And then once I got to New York, I was like, wow, like this is amazing. And of course, there's that that want to, you know, converse and know of people's experience. But I think being in New Orleans was great. You're around so many different groups of people. And I think as a child, you really don't understand the difference in races and cultures. But I think as an adult, having that foundation is really something that has helped me really celebrate all of people's different cultures, and also, you know, people opening the door and letting you into their culture and having knowledge in those experiences. I don't think that being I don't think that the mindset and thinking that, you know, one is better than the other, I don't believe that that is healthy. But I do think that being in those spaces of so many different cultures can only make you a better person. You can only be so vast in your experiences, and also your knowledge about the world, because not everyone's experiences are the same.
Emerald, thank you so much. It has been so nice to get to know you and to learn a little about you. And I hope we find ways to continue to be in touch.
Yes, I hope so too. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You are welcome. You are welcome. So everyone, I think we're coming to our end point here. And of course, you could learn more about us at www.gproject.org, like our Instagram and Facebook pages. You can also send us your own G stories and photos. We would love to hear from you, and we'll be sure to respond. And next week, I have the pleasure, not pressure, but pleasure to host photographer and educator Isaac Diggs, who is a dear friend and my collaborator over the past 16 years. Please join us. Goodbye.